Tony Beall, can you believe it's another Friday?
The time just goes by way too quickly, but I'm glad it's Friday, Julia, because I always love being with you on Fridays. So happy Friday.
Happy Friday. This is Fundraisers Friday here on the Nonprofit Show. And today we're going to talk about something serious. I think we talk about things seriously all the time, but yeah, keeping your powder dry, as they used to say back in the day, managing fundraising events. Or fundraising events, Lord. Managing fundraising stress. And we will talk about events because that is one of the stressors. But we're going to talk about this. Tony, I think you and I off camera, we've spent a lot of time bemoaning the fact that we can't, as a sector, keep fundraisers going, and they burn out and they leave an average tenure after only 18 months. It is a critical issue facing our sector. And so we thought, well, let's, instead of just complaining about it, let's talk about the different types of stress and some of the things that you might be able to manage if you know it's coming at you. So we're going to take a little bit of a different spin. One of the things that we never spin around our presenting sponsors, they include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, and Your Part-Time Controller. Speaking of JMT Consulting, I'm going to be in Nashville next week speaking at their conference. So if you are there, look us up. I'll be all over the area there where the conference is being held, and I certainly would love to meet you. Again, I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, with the amazing Mr. Tony Beall of Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy. Okay, so one of the big stressors that we talk about are fundraising targets and that revenue pressure. Coming to us as fundraisers, we're like, we're going to have to shut down if you don't bring us money. It's a really awful place to live. Mm-hmm. What do you see in this?
Yeah, no, there's definitely, the fundraising role is a critical role within an organization. We talk about it being the fuel for the engine, right? Yeah. Because it takes resources to do this work. And we talk about those resources being time, talent, and treasure. But treasure is a pretty critical part of that three-prong approach in terms of what we need to sustain our organizations. We also, Julia, just real quickly, talked about in the green room, as we go through today's conversation, as fundraisers and folks working in the nonprofit space, we need to accept that there's stress. We need to accept that there are things we can do to manage stress. And we need not feel guilty for doing the things that we need to do to help us be the best we can be for the communities that we serve. So I just wanted to kind of start today's conversation by giving everyone that grace and giving everyone that empowerment to say, I need these things, or I need to do X, Y, and Z in order for me to be able to be the best I can be for my community and to be able to continue to serve this sector. Because there are other sectors that would embrace the talent that many folks have in the nonprofit sector. So if we want to keep them in the sector, and if you want to stay in the sector, then embrace this conversation, embrace the fact that you're going to need, ways to manage stress. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to start the conversation by telling folks, give yourself the grace and accept that you need these things for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you framing that up because I feel like sometimes we get lulled into the sense of these stressors only occur in bad times. And there's a lot of tumult right now in the nonprofit sector with this change of administration. That's a story we're living right now. Mm-hmm. And it's not going away anytime soon. But I think there's stress when times are good too, right? It's a different type of stress, and it still can lead to burnout and some of these other issues. So
well, we talked about the level of accountability in these roles, and that in and of it, that alone, creates so much stress. So so going back to the first kind of topic, what were we saying, Julie? We were saying fundraising targets and revenue pressure. So how do we manage these, the fundraising targets, and how do we manage the stress, created around revenue pressure? And I think one of the best ways to manage stress around this particular topic is open and honest communication. And so that means having open and honest communication about where we are in terms of meeting our targets. But that also means open and honest communication around the tools and the resources that we might need in order to be successful to meet those revenue goals and those revenue targets. So that would be kind of my first pro tip around how do we manage stress in that particular topic for fundraising targets and revenue pressure is open and honest communication and creating an environment where no one feels like they're in trouble for being the messenger if the message just happens to be not so great.
Not what I thought you would say, but very brilliant.
You end up saying that a lot. I know, you never know.
No, I mean, that's one of the beauties of what I get to do every Friday, because you always give me something that's very profound and challenges me to think in a different way. So seriously, I mean, I don't take that lightly. I really appreciate that because that helps me grow. But I'm fascinated by that honesty, like, yeah, it's not going well. And what can we do to make it better? And can we forecast better things versus just like, I don't want to talk about it. I can't deal with it. I'm going to leave. And I feel like in our sector, a lot of times that's what happens, right? People leave because they're not going to be able to make these goals. And they are so freaked out and stressed out by it that it just creates disengagement that hard to come back from.
Yeah, no, very much so. I'm glad that you added that, the disengagement around that. So I really believe that the open and honest communication around where we are with the goal, because there's always going to be goals. If your organization is being run effectively and appropriately, there are going to be annual goals. So those aren't going to go away. So again, I think the best way to manage the stress around them is just honest communication around where are we with the goals, what tools do we need, and celebrating the little small steps along the way to reach the goal. So I never want to minimize the value of celebrating the small successes that ultimately get you to those big wins.
Right. So let's talk about the next type of stress, because it is different and it's created in a different way. And that's donor expectations and relationship management. I think a lot of times people, when they start out in fundraising, they're like, well, once I get the commitment, I've made the sale, I'm moving on to the next thing. But the reality is there's some stewardship there, and there's a relationship that you have to manage. And sometimes donors can really, get a bee in their bonnet and create some additional stress for these fundraisers. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think when we started the conversation, you were kind of mentioning today's environment. I mean, for our high-level donors that have really invested a considerable amount of their treasure to our organizations, they may be very scared, as you are, in terms of what the future looks like for the organization and what the future looks like for their investment, in the mission. So we need to be prepared in today's environment to have conversations with donors at all levels. I mean, I mentioned, larger gift donors, but really donors at all levels around how we're navigating some of the challenges, especially if you're an organization that has, historically relied heavily on federal funding. And, if you're doing an annual report or, if you're communicating with your donors on a regular basis, they know that. They know that a good percentage of your sustainability comes from federal funding, and they need to be, may be very concerned about what the future looks like. So thinking about ways to get ahead of the curve with how they may be feeling around that, with some of your communication, I think is really important. But again, it's relationships. And we talk about it all the time. And hopefully, as you've kind of navigated, the cost-selling sales cycle, and in securing a donor or investor, during your needs discovery part of that cycle, you have understood what the expectations are of this donor or investor. So you know in advance, hopefully, what some of kind of their hot topics are, so that you can address those prior to them having to come to you to ask the question.
I love that. I love like leaning in and not waiting, right? So that you can ask those questions and be articulate in that conversation, because it's that conversation's only going to be amplified. One of the areas of stress that makes me so crazy is fundraising management. I feel like in our sector, we take fundraising professionals and we're like, voila, you are now an event manager. And we put them and their teams and their organizations into heavy duty event management, which is a profession in itself.
Without a doubt.
And then we're like asking people to take on this major, major task. Talk about burnout. It stresses them out. It absorbs all of this energy for months.
It does.
For months. And then we wonder why our fundraisers are just dilapidated when it comes to being creative or engaging.
No,
how do we deal with this? Because I don't know why this is such a consistent story.
Well, as you said, fundraising events take time. They take a lot of resources, and they take a lot of different skill sets in order for them to be, to be implemented effectively and successfully. So, there's script writing with events. There's marketing with events. There's sales with events. There's silent auctions. There's the technology. There is every skill set under the sun related to producing a successful fundraising event. So what I have seen more organizations doing now than ever is outsourcing the event management piece of their fundraising events. So I'm seeing that happening a lot in terms of comments folks are making on LinkedIn. I see it happening in my own community, where historically the fundraising team at the chapter of a national organization would be responsible for everything from A to Z for that annual event. Now they're outsourcing a lot of the logistical work to as you said, event management companies. So I'm all in favor of that, because then that allows your fundraising team to really focus on the sales and the relationship building that make for a successful fundraising event.
Right.
Yeah. So that's, otherwise I would say just really think about whether or not, the fundraising event makes sense. Is your return on effort really there? Or does it ultimately end up being just a great kind of brand awareness opportunity? So really thinking about that return on effort with your fundraising events, and comparing that with kind of the bandwidth and the resources that you have to really have that honest conversation. Just because you've done it for 20 years doesn't mean you should still be doing it.
Right. I love that you said that. And I love return on effort, because I think that a lot of times I've seen development directors that are literally screwing around, checking people in and passing out the bidding paddles when they should be on the other side of the desk or table and doing, cultivation or stewardship and talking with their donors. And I feel like if we could get a grip on our development teams, like how many hours they are spending getting this event put together. And we're talking, as you mentioned, months versus taking that time and spending it with, donors or prospective donors. I've got to believe that would eliminate a lot of stress, because then they would understand where they're putting their energies and towards, right? Versus, 4 hours on one Saturday night, and if there's a tornado or a hurricane or a broken water main or whatever the heck, you're shot, right?
No, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, we just recently had a big event here in South Florida, a big outdoor event I mean, the weather was great, but for some reason, it's a mass market walkathon event. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but their headliner didn't make it.
Oh, gosh.
So, so there's a lot of people that, still a great cause, and all of the other things, but a lot of folks wanted to go to that event to see the headliner. And then, they have to say, oh, sorry, the headliner's not here. So, so you just all of the, and what is your plan B for that? What is your plan B if your headliner ends up not making it into town to do the things that they were supposed to do to elevate the guest experience, for your event? The other thing I would say around events, Julia, and you've probably had this experience a lot also, because when I reflect on my experience at the National MS Society and at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which are event-heavy organizations, I think at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, I had 11 events on my annual calendar that I was responsible for. Everything from like an honoree event to a kayak event, everything in between. And the way that we were able to do that, and I don't know if they still have the same model or not, but the way that we were able to do that was because we had terrific volunteer committees that supported each of those events. Now, that can, when you think about the relationship management, so you think 11 events, and there's probably 7 to 9 committee members for each event. So now you've got maybe 90 people on all these different committees that are helping to make these, these events happen. But what I will say is that with the right event chair and the right people on those committees, it can be a lifesaver for a fundraising professional when you have that level of individuals who are willing to take ownership of the event to ensure its success. It can just be a huge home run. So I mentioned that for organizations that don't lean into maximizing volunteer opportunities or don't necessarily do some things by volunteer committee, there are real successful models to prove that can work. Maybe not all of them, but even if 50% of your events were supported by some type of volunteer committee, you'd find that you'd have the bandwidth to focus on other things.
Right. And I think it's a great cultivation piece. We don't look at volunteerism in this country with all of the opportunities that it can really afford us. I mean, it can really pull in a new type of donor or a deep, meaningful connection. And I think that we've got to, a lot of times we feel like, oh, we can't ask our volunteers. And that's another stressor, that the fundraising team is going to be like, we've got these people that are engaging with us. We need to cultivate them, into, with a deeper relationship. And a lot of volunteer coordinators that are like, get your hands off my volunteers. It's such an interesting dynamic. Before we move on, I also want to say that in my time in the rubber chicken circuit, which has started as a child, and I am still on it, I have noticed a huge stress that could be avoided, especially when we talk about event management, if an organization invests in a trained, qualified benefit auctioneer. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, we'll get somebody from the board who has, who doesn't get stage fright and isn't afraid to, do this. And that's a big mistake. You've got to get this professional, literally voice and leadership, because they will do things and make money for your organization that is shocking. And they will come with a whole program, right? Of goods and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I mean, that's just like I said around, hiring folks that manage the event logistics. I mean, having that professional who does that all the time, you'll see a good return on that. I also wanted to say for folks that attend a lot of these events, because you made me giggle every time you say the rubber chicken circuits. It makes me giggle because it's not far from the truth.
It's
Uh,
true. No.
but the pro tip is always ask for the vegetarian dish.
Oh my God, that is so true. You have no idea. Yeah, well, you do have an idea. No, yeah, that is.
Always ask if there's a vegetarian dish. It's always going to be way better and fresher.
Pressure. Yeah, no, it's very true. It's very true. I mean, I always I always believe that it's not about the food, and you have to, you know, step aside from that. But
Well, and it's up to us to make it not about the food. It's up to us to make it not about the decor. And even though I talked about a headliner, it's up to us to make it not about the headliner.
yeah.
So it's really up to us to deliver the mission, to deliver the importance of their attendance and their support, and have them walking away having had a good experience, but having that mission really resonate in their heart is what we're really challenged with doing.
Exactly. No, exactly. Let's talk about another type of stress. And this is kind of an interesting thing. It tags back to your 11 events in a 12-month period. And this is that multiple campaign efforts and deadlines, and how stressful that's a different type of stress because a lot of times it's task oriented and the financial returns aren't quite tallied for a while. But the stress of getting some of this work done is pretty phenomenal. And I feel like a lot of times we're asking fundraisers to do jobs that maybe they're not well suited for. I see this more in the wheelhouse of marketing and branding and communications. But again, Tony, it seems like we're throwing, you know, the fundraisers into that pan and hoping they can get through it.
Yeah, well, this makes me think of, how do we work smarter and not harder? And I
Mhm.
think part of that goes back to the transparent conversation. So if we're managing multiple campaigns and multiple deadlines, well, what technology do we need to help support us in managing those? And is our organization, is it or is it not, investing in the technology? And there's a lot of technology out there for nonprofits that's free or very affordable, uh, that help folks, do this. We talk often about, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, you have to have a diversified stream of funding for your organization. And so that's going to mean multiple deadlines, all types of different types of strategies.
Mhm.
So how are you kind of managing that, digitally, and what tools do you need in order to do that? So
Mhm.
that's the first thing that I think about is, multiple campaign efforts and deadlines. And do I have all the technology that I need in order to do that effectively?
Yeah,
And to
I
be able
love
to
it.
do it, and to be able to do it where I'm leaving a footprint. Again, we talked about the short tenure of folks
Yes.
in the space. And where's the footprint of all of this work if we don't have the databases, the workflow technology, all of that?
Mhm.
If a lead fundraiser or anyone should leave the organization, and someone should need to step in.
I love that you said that because talk about a stressor. If you're in leadership or the C suite and you look around and you're like, holy moly, this boat's going to sink if we get one little hole because so and so leaves. I mean, that's an awful feeling and that's a stressor. You are right. We must do a better job of demanding what that accountability, that process looks like so that we can move it on to the next team or leadership or contractor even, right?
Mhm. Right,
You know,
exactly.
if we're going to hire it out, we better know kind of like what's cooking. um Last but not least, let's talk about this because I feel like this is just an elephant on the chest of so many fundraisers, and that's internal expectations and leadership demands. We talked about this last week in the episode of Fundraisers Friday about how much we communicate to the organization on the whole about where we are with our goals and our fundraising, because that creates stress for the mainline team members, from the receptionist to the, facilities management person, worried about, are they going to lose their job if fundraising doesn't meet their goals? And so I'm kind of curious about this piece, about that internal pressure that's and stress. You walk into your office or on a campus and you feel like everybody's looking at you wondering, are we going to have a job? Are we keeping the doors open?
Mm-hmm.
It's just an awful feeling.
Yeah, no, it is an awful feeling, and it's the reality for a lot of fundraisers, and we try to be mindful and very intentional in our conversations, Julia, because of the varying sizes of organizations for folks that are leaning in and watching or listening. So for the smaller shops, it is very stressful because you may be the one. So when you walk into your brick and mortar nonprofit, you may in fact, feel the eyes. And so that's again, and I know I make it sound simple and it's a little redundant again, but that's just where having the communication, the open and honest communication with your leadership. If you have eyes on you, you should be able to share that with your CEO or executive director and say, when I walk into the building every day, I feel like people are looking at me like, what are you going to accomplish today? How much money are you going to raise? Are you going to raise today? If you don't raise the money that you should raise today, am I going to have a job? And so having that conversation and figuring out what is your communication strategy or your engagement strategy with the rest of your team to help minimize those fears, for them. So again, a little redundant, but I just think open and honest communication and strategy around the way that you're communicating with team members and the level of engagement around obtainment of goals is going to be really important to keep just a healthy environment and an optimistic environment within the organization. I mean, goals are stressful all the time. And no matter what sector you work in, there's going to be annual goals and expectations for you to meet. And there are also many sectors other than the nonprofit sector where there's all kinds of unknowns. But yet you still need to figure out how to deliver on the promise that you've made to your leadership and to the community, that you're serving. I think this is where, when I think about some of the things that really help folks navigate space in the nonprofit sector, I think having peer groups and associations, organizations that you belong to, where you can reach out to folks and say, I'm really struggling with this. That's one of the reasons why I love our AFP chapter, is because I know that those types of conversations happen amongst our membership. And we just recently had a members only reception, and I overheard folks talking about the challenges that they're having, and not necessarily looking for anyone to have the magic answer or the magic wand, but just a safe space for me to say, what the heck?
Right.
This is what I'm feeling, and again, this is the target that I feel like is on my back, and you feel the same way. And if you do, how are you navigating it? If you don't feel that way, how do you prevent yourself from feeling that way? So these peer networks and having the opportunity to engage with others that are sharing your same space, so to speak, is so valuable. And that's why I wish more organizations would invest in the membership investment for their team members, for things like AFP or Chamber of Commerce, whatever that might look like in your own backyard. But there's a lot of value, folks belonging to associations and peer networks where they can have these conversations outside of their organization as well.
Right. Well, Tony, as always, I mean, when we get to meet with you on Fridays, we learn so much. I feel like you're always incredibly honest and realistic, But yet you give us actionable ways to look at our profession, to look at the fundraisers life inside of a nonprofit, inside of the nonprofit sector, because it is so very different than every other job that goes on, from programming to management. I mean, it is incredibly different. And so thank you once again for being on our side. If you've got a question for us or a topic, reach out. Both Tony and I are very active in social media, but you can email us directly at info@americannonprofitacademy.com. If you want to get to our executive producer, that's helpdesk at americannonprofitacademy.com, and you'll get right into Kevin's mailbox. But, it's really an important thing that we know what's the pain point of our viewers and our listeners and how we can work with you. We are so delighted that we get to work with our presenting sponsors each and every day. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Interim Executives Academy, and Your Part-Time Controller. Again, as I mentioned, I'm going to be working with a JMT team at Innovate 2025 in Nashville next week. So if you're there, please come up and introduce yourself, and we'll get to chat. Tony, an amazing episode. Thank you for helping level set where some of these stresses are coming to us from, that they're not all the same. I think that's been an interesting exploration. Stress is not just the same all around, right?
I think the big takeaway is, embrace that it exists and give yourself the grace and the resources to navigate it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think those are words to live by. And I'm so appreciative that you would share that with us today. As we end each and every episode of the Nonprofit Show, we end with this message, and it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everyone. See you again.